We begin the show with Representative Cathy McMorris Rodgers, Chairman of the House Republican Conference. Thank you so much for being with us, Congresswoman.
Thank you.
The President, Speaker Boehner, and others met at the White House on Friday morning. Not very much came out of it, rather predictable reactions. The President said this sequestration, which took effect on Friday, is dumb and arbitrary. Is it, and how long will it last?
Well, I would add it's also avoidable. We are talking about across-the-board cuts that were agreed to a year and a half ago in exchange for raising the debt ceiling, although it was never going to happen. But this was the President's idea as the kicker so that we would come up with an agreement, which we failed to do. And so now sequestration takes effect. So
how do we avoid it, and when will we avoid it?
We avoid it by coming up with a plan to replace these cuts, $85 billion out of nearly a $4 trillion budget.
What's your plan?
The Republicans in the House have twice passed a plan to replace the cuts.
Wait a minute. You replaced it, you did it in the last Congress.
Well,
what are you doing in this Congress? And also, let me just go to that plan. That plan didn't touch Medicare or Social Security, which you Republicans tell me is the greatest driver of chronic deficits. Well, that's not a serious plan.
It was a plan that we put on the table. And the difference is that we do look at the entire federal budget, whereas the across-the-board cuts only impact discretionary, and they disproportionately
You don't think you ought to do entitlements?
We believe we need to take action to save Medicare, save Social Security.
But shouldn't that be part of this, any replacement for sequestration?
Well, sequestration is focusing on the discretionary part of the budget. Absolutely, that needs to be a part of it.
When are you going to put forward something on Medicare and Social Security? That's the tough stuff.
We have. The Republican, yes, look at the Ryan budget.
For 10 years, doesn't touch it.
The last 2 years, we've put forward the Ryan budget, which does at least take some steps to putting Medicare...
Way down the road, though. What I'm saying is to replace sequestration, which has to start cutting right now. When are you going to put something that cuts Medicare and Social Security if that's the chronic driver of debt? Well,
we came up with smarter reforms, smarter cuts than the President's across-the-board sequester that disproportionately impacts the military. And we came up with our first plan over 300 days ago. 300 days ago, because we knew this day was coming. It could have been avoided, and we're still waiting for the President. We're still waiting for the Democrats.
This is the White House. This is their plan. Now, you may not like it, but it's there. It's got real cuts in entitlements. It's got real cuts. It's got tax increases. It affects Social Security.
Nothing has passed the Senate.
No, but that's their plan.
And the President needs to make, he's been traveling, doing his campaigning. He needs to come up here to Capitol Hill. He's traveled over 5,000 miles.
But tell me where I'm wrong. The President has a plan right here. You all in the House, in this Congress, haven't introduced a thing.
We have. We've put a plan on the table. The President needs to urge the Senate Democrats to take action.
He
needs to come up here.
When was your plan put on the table?
We put a plan on the table over 300 days ago.
But in this Congress, do you have anything to replace sequester in this Congress?
Why should the House have to pass a third plan before the Senate puts any kind of a proposal on the table? You know, it's pretty basic to the legislative process that the House passes a proposal and the Senate passes a proposal. And for all of the people who criticize Congress for waiting for the last minute, it was the Republicans who, over 300 days ago, knew this day. We knew this day was coming for a year and a half. It could have been avoided. We didn't have to wait for the last minute. And yet the President he's been around the country campaigning.
Your answer is that you're not going to put forth a plan in this Congress until the Senate does something. The House is not going to put forth a plan in this Congress.
You know, we've been waiting for the Senate to act.
So nothing until the Senate does something, right?
We do want to see a plan from the Senate, yes.
You talked about discretionary spending, and we talked about entitlements. Entitlements are the driver, Medicare, Social Security, of the deficits. Discretionary spending is going to the lowest level since the Eisenhower administration. The White House put out this stuff. I assume it's correct. In your state, for instance, these sequester would cut $11.5 million for kids with disabilities. That's an issue that you care passionately about.
Yes, it is.
Are those the kind of cuts we ought to to be making rather than entitlements?
I do not like these cuts. I believe there are smarter ways to reduce spending in the federal government, smarter ways to come up with the reforms. This sequester, this was the president's idea back when we were debating raising the debt ceiling. These across-the-board cuts that unfortunately do mean that people are losing jobs and we're losing important support for programs that we all support. We don't want to see these programs cut. We don't want to see people losing their jobs, and it could have been avoided if we were doing our job, if we were up here actually putting together the replacement plans, $85 billion out of a nearly $4 trillion budget.
But no taxes.
We can come up. You know, the president has yet to put actual spending cuts on the table.
There's specifics right there. I mean, you may not like them. They may be bad specifics, but there's specifics.
The president, he continues to say we need to raise taxes.
Right.
Americans, middle-class Americans that are seeing less of their paycheck, take-home paycheck every year. This is, you know, the federal government. Everyone knows there's waste in the federal government. $2.2 billion on a free cell phone program just in 2013. President Obama has spent $50 million promoting Obamacare, his health care program. He hired a public relations firm. You know, everyone, we know that there are smarter ways to spend money in the federal government. We don't have to have the sequester, and we don't have to have this kind of job
But
loss.
that solid wall of Republican opposition to tax increases seems to be cracking. Scott Rigel, your colleague from Virginia, said he would accept higher taxes to stave off big defense cuts. Peter King of New York says you got to have revenues in any deal. Lindsey Graham on the other side says $600 billion of tax increases for serious entitlement reform. Are you willing to talk to those members and start that kind of a deal making?
The Republicans we want to be a part of the solution. In Washington, D.C., though, we have a spending problem. The federal government has a spending problem. We made a promise. We made an agreement. It was a compromise a year and a half ago. And part of the deal was that we were going to cut $85 billion out of the federal government. You know what? And we never seem to get to the place where we actually want to move forward on the cuts. When we agree to raise taxes or raise revenue, that takes effect immediately. But in the history of this country, the cuts never seem to happen. And that's where the Republicans believe it is very important. And it's part of getting our economy growing again, is to get our budget more in balance, is to start getting the federal government living within its means. The fact that we have a record debt and that we've had trillion-dollar deficits every year since President Obama's been in office is a drag on our economy. It makes it hard for families, for businesses to make decisions.
Cathy McMorris Rodgers, the highest-ranking woman in Republican leadership in Congress, thank you so much for being with us.